A middle-aged brunette woman with long, flowing hair, Zeynep, stands on a cliff, staring out across the wide ocean. The soft breeze teases her curls as she takes a deep breath and observes the beautiful vista before her. She is contemplating the nature of happiness and is about to reach a conclusion when her narrative abruptly stops and whisks us back to her past, to the point where it all began. She is in bed with her husband Ilyas, trying desperately to sleep through his extremely loud snoring. She can't relax because of the volume, and eventually is forced to reach across and grab his nose. Exasperated and knowing she won't be able to get back to sleep, she gets up and starts to get dressed, pulling on tights that go all the way up to her stomach and staring at herself in the mirror. As she does so, her husband starts mumbling behind her about work, and she turns to him sharply, annoyed. It turns out that today is her mother's funeral, and as she makes them breakfast, her husband is apologetically letting her know that he can't go with her, because he has to go to work. Just as she's furiously trying to get her head around his excuses, her father comes downstairs and hands her a giant pile of laundry, shrugging when she points out the laundry room is right there behind him. Then her daughter Fia appears and makes her drop the clothes on the floor in surprise. She doesn't seem to be too affected by the loss of her grandmother, wearing casual clothes and zipping past her mother to grab some food. Zeynep rolls her eyes at her daughter's behavior, then turns to see that her husband has stolen the slice of toast she made for herself. It all seems like too much for poor Zeynep, caught in the middle of this chaotic family and having to do everything herself. Ilyas tries playing a joke to lighten the mood, making Fia giggle as he pretends to strangle her grandfather, but Zeynep scolds him. It's not the most appropriate day to be pulling that kind of prank. He slips out of the door to go to work and leaves Zeynep trying to force her family members to get ready. She quickly runs after him, tailing him as he speaks to someone on the phone, laughing happily. He turns around and spots her just as he gets to the car, and she points out sadly that she hasn't heard him laugh like that in a long time. Seemingly a little disturbed by that comment, Ilyas doesn't know what to say. It's clear from the outset that their relationship isn't a happy one. She passes him a piece of paper and asks if he'll read a eulogy later on. She can't bear to stand up in front of a crowd. Seeing that she's upset, he agrees, comforting her quickly before getting in the car and heading off to work. Zeynep lets herself back into the house and her neighbor meets her on the stairs. He hands her something that her mother left for her. It's been in his possession, but she said that she wanted Zeynep to have it. It's an old diary written in Croatian, a language Zeynep doesn't speak. With the shouts of her father echoing in the background, asking her to come and do some task or other, Zeynep ignores it and sits down on the stairs, perusing the documents that accompanied the diary. It's a purchase agreement for a property in Croatia, a house that her mother owned before she passed away. Frowning, Zeynep is busy looking up the location on her phone when her father finally gets irritated at waiting for her, and comes out to the hallway, accusing her of leaving out the wrong trousers for him. When he sees her looking at the documents, he questions it, and she's forced to reveal her mother's secret property. Her father is angry upon hearing that his wife never told him about it, even going so far as to suggest she was having an affair with the neighbor who kept the papers for her. Zeynep watches him have a tantrum in mild disbelief. She protests that the money was all her mother's own money, and it's in her sole name, but her father isn't having any of it. Fia comes downstairs and gets irritated at her mother when she orders her back up to get dressed in something black. Poor Zeynep is left to try and manage this dysfunctional family, all the stress resting on her shoulders. As Fia stomps off, her father returns to watching TV and ignoring her, declaring that his wife is a stranger to him. At the funeral, the family is greeting the guests, and Zeynep has to consistently tell her father off, as he keeps informing people that she was a liar and a double agent. Ilyas isn't answering his phone, and he doesn't turn up in time to make the speech she was so terrified to say in front of the crowd. Zeynep finally loses it and bursts into tears in front of everyone, running out of the funeral to go to her husband's restaurant and find him. Fia stares after her, nonplussed, as her grandfather blames her for not keeping her mother in check. When Zeynep arrives at the restaurant, she sees Ilyas laughing again, chatting with a young female chef. They're standing close together and it makes Zeynep's heart ache. He spots her and hastily tries to offer more excuses. His watch stopped. He didn't realize the time, but she's not prepared to hear a word of it and walks out. Cursing, he follows her to the street where they argue about his lack of responsibility. Nora, the young chef, comes out and apologizes on Ilyas's behalf, explaining everything away and claiming it was all her fault, but Zeynep isn't buying any of it. However, when Nora runs back inside, Ilyas is more concerned about whether she's going to quit, and runs after her, gaslighting Zeynep and somehow making everything her fault. She stands still in disbelief, staring after him as he angrily says they'll talk about it at home. This, however, is her final breaking point. Enough is enough. Refusing to be stepped on any longer, Zeynep decides to go to her mother's secret house in Croatia, away from her demanding father, her irresponsible husband, and her disinterested daughter. She whirls on her heel and gets in the van, setting her GPS for the address on the documents and not once looking back. It's a long journey, and she drives through mountains and coastal roads, all the way through the day, until finally, she arrives at a small dock in Croatia. It seems as though she has to go the rest of the way by boat. The house is on a small island off the coast. She's a bit lost and confused, not understanding Croatian. But a man directs her to the parking lot and she manages to rush over to the last boat just as it's about to leave, running frantically down the jetty to catch it. She stands on the bow and stares into the setting sun over the ocean, feeling a sense of freedom and relief she hasn't felt in years. It's almost as though the burdens are physically being lifted from her shoulders. She smiles into the breeze, exhilarated and excited to be on this sudden new adventure. A small bus takes the passengers from the dock on the other side and drives them cross-country over the island to the small town. However, on the way, bad luck strikes as the engine brakes on the bus, forcing them to stop in the middle of an open field. Undeterred by her ill fortune, Zeynep takes her phone and uses it to guide her by foot the rest of the way, carrying her small bag. It's dark by the time she arrives at the house, isolated at the very edge of the island, and her phone dies just as she reaches the front door. Exhausted, she stumbles inside and collapses onto the bed, too tired from her journey to even think about the situation she's found herself in. There's a warm bed and that's all that matters. Sunlight streams into the room the next morning, and Zeynep awakens to the sound of snoring. She instinctively leans over once again to grab Ilyas's nose in irritation, just as she does every morning. But this time, it's not her husband she's in bed with. Another man who she doesn't recognize is lying naked beside her. He wakes up and both scream, jumping away from each other. Zeynep grabs her shoe, addressing him in English and threatening him with it, demanding to know who he is. He introduces himself as Joseph, holding the sheet to cover himself, and strangely enough he seems more concerned with the giant stomach-holding pair of tights she's wearing than what she's doing there. Zeynep is flabbergasted at his nonchalance about the fact that they just slept in the same bed, stressing out and grabbing her clothes. Joseph is unconcerned, suggesting that she needs something for her tired face, and goes to a pantry to get something out. Despite her shock, Zeynep finds herself looking appreciatively at his bare bottom, and has to shake herself out of it, fleeing through the front door with her bag. Upon stepping outside, though, she's blown away by the natural beauty that surrounds her. She was too tired and it was too dark the previous night to notice it. Now she's presented with the rolling cliffs and sparkling waves, and a smile lights up her face as she breathes in the moment, briefly forgetting about the strange encounter she just had and reveling in her freedom. Her moment is rudely interrupted by Joseph, who emerges from the house behind her and offers her some face cream. Shaken, she turns to him abruptly and shows him the document proving that her mother owns the house. He studies the document briefly and Zeynep admits that her mother passed away recently. Joseph frowns, empathetic, and gives his condolences, holding out his hand with the intent of making a fresh start. Surprised, Zeynep takes it and introduces herself properly. She asks Joseph why he's living in the house, and he admits that he was born there. His family used to own it, until they fell on hard times and he was forced to sell it. However, the buyer, Zeynep's mother, told him he could continue to stay there rent-free until someone came one day to take it from him. She knew that Zeynep would inherit the property for herself. Zeynep is astonished at her mother's generosity, but recovers quickly and politely asks him to move out. Joseph asks her when she plans to move in, and Zeynep foolishly admits that she's not going to stay there, but went there with the idea of turning it into an Airbnb. Infuriated, Joseph curses at her in Croatian, then storms into the house and begins grabbing his things and putting them into a backpack. He's incredulous that he's being thrown out of his home for someone to turn it into an Airbnb. He stomps out, muttering about Airbnb, disappointed in Zeynep, and making sure to rant at her on the way down the path. She feels a little guilty, but tries to get over it by distracting herself, entering the house, and looking around. However, it's clear from a cursory exploration that the house is not so simple. The trapdoor to the pantry is heavy, and it's full of jars and pots she knows nothing about. She has to stand on a chair to reach the switch for the lone light bulb, which is powered by a windmill on top of the house and quickly sputters out. She sees Joseph pitching a tent at the end of the garden, dresses, and heads out to confront him, still determined to kick him out properly. She addresses him as Spartacus, prompting him to accuse her of racism. She protests that she's Turkish herself, and he laughs at her, speaking English, with a German contract and a Croatian house, but she's Turkish. How confusing her life must be. Little does he know the truth of his words. Zeynep pulls herself up, trying not to be affected, and orders him off the property, but Joseph kindly informs her that he's already off the property. He sold the house, not all of the land, and he's fully entitled to stay in the garden, if he wants to. He shows her the line at the end of her section, then milks a goat directly into his teacup, disgusting the urban woman. Then he pointedly suggests she takes a shower, indicating the water pump nearby. Unsure what else to do, Zeynep showers, pouring the bucket of water over herself and gasping at the cold. When she's sure he's not looking, she grabs the face cream he gave her, lying abandoned on the path, and dabs it on her tired eyes. Freshly clean and dressed, she heads outside to find her mystery squatter, but it appears he's gone off to work. she decides to take a walk down the nearby lane to find the closest town, or even another house. However, she's quickly startled as a flock of sheep burst out of a pen behind her and crowd into the road, blocking her way. Resolute, she turns around and goes in the other direction, and before long she comes upon a picturesque little town with a harbor nestled into a bay among the cliffs. In the town, she buys herself an old bicycle to get around, then enters a shop to look for clothes. Unfortunately, she finds out soon enough that the person working in the shop is none other than Joseph, who immediately mocks her, calling her Darth Vader. Unwilling to deal with him in his moody state, she says she'll wait for the owner to return. When he does, beaming at seeing a new face in his store, Joseph leaves immediately with a sulky comment, guilting and irritating Zeynep even more. Later on, in the local cafe, she checks her phone to see 8 missed calls from Ilias, but doesn't return them, opting to put her phone away. She will deal with the mess she left in Germany later on. She watches a couple leave from a table in front of her, when once again, Joseph appears out of nowhere, taking the empty glasses. It seems he works quite a few jobs in town to keep the bills paid. She brushes him off as she's meeting a property agent in the cafe about how to modernize the house. Joseph is even more sulky upon hearing this. Soon enough, the agent arrives, greeting her with a broad smile. Joseph makes his disdain for the real estate agent well known before slinking away. Zeynep chats with the charming man throughout the night, and he tells her all about his opinion of Joseph. It's clear the two have some unresolved issues between them. He paints him as this laughable, ridiculous figure whom the locals inexplicably have a soft spot for, even though he's a nutcase. Zeynep finds herself agreeing with him, drawn in by the handsome man's charisma. The agent admits, though, that because Joseph kept well on his side of the land, it's going to be difficult to fix up the cottage. Zeynep realizes she has to try and work something out with him. She pays her half of the bill, not wanting to be in debt to anyone, and the man is impressed, calling her a strong and independent woman. Zeynep likes the sound of that, toasting to it happily. She rides home later, drunkenly singing to herself about her newfound independence and segueing into 99 Luft Balance. It's short-lived though, as she crashes into the road, swaying right off the bicycle. She continues singing, staring into the sky, remembering how much she loved the song when she was younger, when her whole life still stretched out ahead of her, filled with possibilities. Joseph arrives at the scene on his motorbike and stops, worried she might be hurt. Zeynep is so drunk that she doesn't even care, happily lying on the road and singing. When Joseph begrudgingly helps her up, she clings onto him, calling him Spartacus again. Being the kind person that he is, he hoists her over his shoulder, realizing she won't make it onto the motorbike, and carries her down the path. She begins to cry in her drunken state, missing her home, and Joseph calms her down by singing 99 Luft Balance, which he overheard. She immediately perks up from her undignified position over his shoulder, playing the drums on his bottom, and he objects, claiming that if she's awake enough to play the drums, she should walk. She apologizes, actually meaning it, for the first time, and her sincerity and vulnerability are enough to get him to continue singing as they make their way home. Upon arriving, he dumps Zeynep on the bed, cracking his aching back. He's about to leave her to go back to his tent when she cries out, pulling at her giant pair of tights, claiming she can't breathe and can't get them off. Joseph takes pity on her despite her dramatics and helps her pull them off, aghast at how tightly they were holding her in. He walks outside and upon realizing he's still holding the garment, burns it with his lighter. It's clear he doesn't think she needs such ridiculous things. When morning comes, Zeynep wanders out into the garden covered in a sheet and sees her tights in a charred mess. She confronts Joseph about it, knowing it was him, but he simply tells her to eat better and then she won't need them anyway, offering her some of his breakfast. Exasperated, but thankful for his thoughtfulness, she takes a seat beside him. He tells her that she's looking good, then quickly qualifies the comment by insisting he's not romantically interested in her. It was just a compliment. He claims love is for fools, with a bitter look on his face that speaks to a history of heartbreak. Zeynep watches him with curiosity. He brings up the topic of her mother, having found out from the store owner that she was born on the island. Zeynep, though, doesn't know anything about her mother's history. She thought that this house had been where her mother was born. Joseph debunks her theory, because it was his family who turned it into a house before her mother bought it from him. Zeynep abruptly goes up to look at the house, with the door painted in her mother's favorite color. Joseph lists the things she tried to buy from the store and accuses her of trying to modernize it too much, of not knowing what she's doing. She wants windows and bright light, but the house was made to keep the sun out. Zeynep tries to protest politely, conceding that she admires his passion, but he's not seeing things. He thinks, though, that she's the one not seeing. She barges in out of nowhere, doesn't know one word of Croatian, and is trying to turn her mother's cherished house into a rental for strangers. Zeynep stalks off, unwilling to continue the conversation and leaving him frustrated once again. Later, she is cycling through the countryside on her bicycle when she receives a call from Fia. She answers, worried that something might be wrong with her daughter, but all Fia says is that she's hungry and there's no food. Zeynep laughs, relieved that she's okay, if all she's complaining about is food. Ilias works at a restaurant. Thea sullenly blames her mother for taking off in the van she needs to take her things to university and demands that she return soon. Zeynep tries to ask her daughter what's wrong, but Thea just cuts the call off after yelling that she needs to bring the van back. She stares at her phone, dumbstruck and not sure what she did to make her daughter so angry with her. It seems like they've been having problems for a while now. Joseph is reading when the real estate agent drives by. He shouts down to the road, telling him to leave, and the man acquiesces, but asks him to let Zeynep know that they've had a big bid for the house, a really good offer to buy it. Joseph watches him drive away, worried about what this news might mean for him. Meanwhile, Zeynep is in town asking the shop owner, Joseph, about the prospect of getting all the items she wanted for the house. He is surprised to find her asking, because Joseph had told him the order was cancelled. Zeynep realizes he sabotaged her and returns to the house intending to let him have it. However, upon arriving she discovers that he's not there. Mischievously, she grabs a pair of his underwear from his tent and burns them, in retribution for her tights. She sets about decorating the inside of the house, putting out flowers and fondly looking at a picture of her mother. She sees Joseph coming back up the path and peers out of the window to see his reaction to his burnt underwear. However, he's brought a guest with him and she hides in embarrassment as his friend picks up the remains in horror. Joseph only looks towards the house, knowing full well who did it. The two men approach the house and Joseph calls through the door, asking Zeynep if she saw the strange person in the garden who burned his old uncle's favorite underpants, the ones he keeps for special occasions. Humiliated, Zeynep hides, pretending she's not home, but Joseph rolls his eyes, saying his uncle doesn't speak English and doesn't know she's the lunatic who massacred his underwear. At that, she opens the door with a broad smile, greeting him like nothing is wrong. In the ensuing conversation, the uncle calls Zeynep beautiful and simply wants to know what happened to his underwear, but Joseph mistranslates the whole thing. He claims that his uncle is accusing her of destroying the heritage of the island for future generations, while Zeynep protests that she's just trying to support her family with the rental income. Eventually, he tells the uncle that Zeynep was the one who burned his underpants, but upon discovering this, the old man just pulls her into a hug and warns his nephew not to let his brother steal this woman away from him. Joseph's face gains a dark cloud as he walks away, calling Zeynep a pyromaniac. His uncle remains embracing her for a moment longer, smiling and knowing that the connection between the two is deeper than it appears to be. Clueless as to what he told Joseph, or why her squatter left, Zeynep smiles back. Later on, a group of men including Joseph are singing down by the bottom of the cliff. Zeynep sees them there, happy at hearing their melody. When the group settles around the fire, she brings out some sweets for them, asking Joseph to tell the rest that their singing was beautiful, and he invites her to sit down and join them all. She takes a seat beside him as one of the men strums on a guitar, and Joseph takes the opportunity to ask her about her song, 99 Luftballons. He explains a story from his past, when he went to the local movie night as a child and saw a French film about a boy whose best friend was a red balloon. He used to dream of having such a thing for himself. On his next birthday, his father bought him one and it felt like magic. Zeynep teases him about his nostalgia, and his uncle takes that moment to indicate that Joseph should move closer to her. She giggles, noticing the gesture, and asks Joseph whether he's told his uncle that she's already married. Noticeably, she doesn't object to the idea in principle, only because it would mean being unfaithful to Ilias. Joseph laughs off his uncle's behavior, blaming it on the testosterone pills he's been taking and claiming he's just too frisky. This was why he initially bought the tent, so he wouldn't have to stay in the same bed. At the end of the night, Joseph brings his uncle up to the house, and Zeynep graciously agrees to let him stay in bed. She sits outside by the fire with her bedding, reading a Croatian dictionary by candlelight and trying to translate her mother's diary. Joseph watches her from afar with a look of curiosity mixed with longing. It seems his uncle wasn't far off the mark after all. The next morning, Joseph takes Zeynep out on a boat, serving her breakfast as she groans about her seasickness. She accuses him of trying to kill her, and he jokes that it'd be the easiest way to get his house back. Then he asks her seriously why she came to Croatia alone. Zeynep shrugs off the question by saying her husband's busy, then asks Joseph about his solitude. He casually informs her that his wife left him for his brother, then the pair passed away in a car accident. She's horrified, but he has become jaded about it. When he moves closer and asks her again why she's there alone, she opens up and tells him about her chaotic and unhappy life in Germany. At the same time, he asks Zeynep if she still loves her husband, while she asks him if he still misses his wife. Zeynep answers first, and tells Joseph honestly that she would need to hear or see Ilias again to know for sure whether there's still anything there between them. In a tender moment, Joseph leans forward and brushes Zeynep's hair away from her face. Just then, the spell is broken as Zeynep's phone rings. It's the real estate agent, whose name we finally learn is Conrad, calling her about the offer which Joseph failed to inform her of. He looks away, guilty, busying himself with the boat as she rounds on him, asking why he didn't tell her. He tries to defend himself by pointing out that money isn't the reason for her problems, but she's angry and lashes out, telling him she's going to call her husband. Joseph starts up the boat to take them back to shore, and the romantic moment they shared just a second ago feels like it's a lifetime away. Ilyas is in the kitchen working when Zeynep calls. He located her using her phone's GPS and wasn't concerned after realizing where she went. He's happy to hear she's safe, but when she suggests starting over, selling the house in Croatia, and trying again to fix their marriage, he confesses that he's been sleeping with Nora ever since she left. He realized they were unhappy too, and he doesn't want to fix things. He thinks she should stay in Croatia and they should try to move on with their new, separate lives. Zeynep bursts into tears and hangs up before he can finish, realizing that she's been holding herself back because she was still clinging to the hope of a life at home that no longer exists. Upon seeing her start to cry, Joseph panics, worried that something happened to her family. She frantically asks him how to turn off the phone's GPS, but Joseph just takes it and throws it into the ocean. She watches it fall in horror, then leaps off the boat and swims to shore, needing to get away from him, get out of the situation and let her emotions out. She locks herself in the house, slips down to the floor, and sobs, pulling off her wedding ring and throwing it across the room, then lies in her bed for a long time, ignoring Joseph banging and calling through the door. He leaves water and food outside for her, constantly tending to her over the next couple of days, even though she isn't answering him. He warns her that he'll give her one more day and then he's going to kick the door down. The next day, though, it's a different voice at the door. Conrad has come by to warn Zeynep that there are going to be people coming to the house soon to do surveys and check electricity, piping, and other necessities for the new buyers. At this, she opens the door, although she doesn't immediately respond, just stepping out of the house to see the sunlight. Joseph turns up and threatens Conrad, and the two argue back and forth until they are interrupted by a banging sound from inside the house. They turn, startled, to see Zeynep sledgehammering down a wall. Both cry out for her to stop, but she doesn't listen, yelling that she needs light and heat, and she doesn't care about letting the sun in. Conrad and Joseph both end up impressed at her strength, agreeing that she's crazy, but actually kind of into her intensity. She steps out proudly, off to buy a window from the other Joseph's shop, leaving them both staring nonplussed after her. She cycles down to the town, feeling refreshed and reinvigorated after her period of mourning her relationship. It's raining when she arrives, but it doesn't dampen her spirits, and she pops into a bar to get a drink. Conrad finds her in there and approaches her, commending her actions back at the house. She smiles, informing him she's celebrating finally being able to breathe. The pair share a drink, and Conrad makes a move on her, gently touching her hand and pulling her into a soft kiss, turned on by her display of independence and strength. Zeynep lets herself get caught up in the attention, enjoying the feeling of being wanted again, just as Joseph walks into the bar looking for her. He sees them kissing and, in a fit of jealousy, confronts them. He derisively calls Conrad Macron, after the French president who fell in love with an older woman, and refers to Zeynep as grandma. Furiously she storms out, embarrassed, leaving Conrad to finish his drink. Joseph follows her and they have an explosive argument in the street, where she preaches about how misogynistic and offensive his remarks were. He shows some humility, admitting that he was wrong to say what he did, but he didn't want her to make a mistake she would regret. He sits down at a table, beseeching her to listen to him, because he has something to tell her, show her, and give her. She makes a cutting remark about one of those things being his penis, causing him to laugh, but she rolls her eyes and sits down opposite, breaking the tension, willing to hear him out. He apologizes for playing games with her, prompting her to grin with delight at the fact that he acknowledged his behavior. Then he reaches into his bag for the thing he wanted to give her, her mother's diary, along with a full translation. He's transcribed the entire thing for her. He asks hopefully if that's better than a penis, and she breaks into laughter. The two of them wander the streets together, their relationship repaired by his thoughtful actions. Zeynep listens as he tells her what he learned from the diary, and takes her to the house where her mother grew up. With tears in her eyes, she gazes at the simple structure. He turns to her seriously and asks how much the buyers are offering for the house, hoping to enter the bidding war. It's over 1 million euros, though, so he has no chance of matching it. He sighs and lets her know that if she wants his half of the garden to complete the sale, she can have it. She's taken aback by his gesture, unsure whether to accept, but he's resolute that it might be time for him to move on from the past. That night, she reads the translation of the diary he gave her. It speaks about her mother's childhood, with a heartfelt letter to Zeynep about the day her grandfather left. He went to war and never returned. At 5 years old, she climbed up the monastery on the highest mountain on the island to look for him. Zeynep travels across the island herself, retracing her mother's footsteps, trying to understand what she wanted her to know by leaving her this house and this diary. Her mother's final entry, which she reads under a tree on the grounds of the beautiful monastery, confirms that although they never talked about such things, her mother always saw that Zeynep was fading away, becoming less of herself in the safe little world that had been created for her, and she hoped that she could help her daughter find her true happiness by giving her the adventure she needed. Zeynep's pilgrimage ends on the cliff, the breeze blowing in her hair as she stares out across the vast, beautiful ocean, the same place we saw her at the very beginning of the movie. We've come full circle and finally understand the story behind her search for happiness. happiness. We still don't know her conclusion, though, because the scene cuts away to Joseph, sleeping under a tree. Zeynep approaches him and he wakes up, appreciating how good she looks. She replies happily that she feels good, and sits beside him, enjoying the afternoon sun. A car pulls up soon afterward, and Joseph reacts with fear, knowing the visit will mean bad news, and pleading with Zeynep that the mystery man who is driving cannot know that he resides in a tent. She agrees, bewildered, going to greet their guest as Joseph runs off into the house. It turns out it's Joseph's brother Drazen. Zeynep is confused, because Joseph told her that his brother died along with his ex-wife in the car accident. It seems he's very much alive, though, and he's the one who's put in the offer on the house. He's flown over from the States to finalize it with her. Zeynep is suspicious of his intentions, asking him if Joseph knows he's the one who put the offer in. He is evasive and dodges the question, simply putting pressure on her to conclude the sale as soon as possible. However, she's hesitant, looking around for Joseph who's nowhere to be found. Later on, it's dark, and she still can't find him. When she eventually sees him returning to his tent, she catches him as he's packing up his things. He hurriedly explains that he needs to leave because he found out it's Drazen who's buying, and he can't stay in the same place as his brother. Zeynep stops him and turns down Drazen's offer. He's dumbfounded, unable to believe she wants to stay. She asks him why he said his brother died. She's not accusatory, though. She understands why he might feel as though he needs to pretend they're both gone. He admits that he made it up because they're both dead to him. Zeynep takes a deep breath and reveals to Joseph that her heart felt closed off before she met him, invoking a Croatian saying he taught her. But before she can finish it, a goat starts eating her dress. She pauses as Joseph shoos the goat away, feeling stupid. But he urges her to go on, desperate to hear how her sentence ends. She finishes by gesturing that her heart is open to him, and he wastes no time, jumping forward and gathering her in his arms, kissing her hungrily. Wrapped up in each other, they burst into the house, taking a brief interlude to chase the goat out of the house, much to Zeynep's relief, as until then she'd begun to half believe the rumors about Joseph and the goat. He loudly protests the goat molesting label the townsfolk have given him, and she hushes him, not wanting to spoil the moment. As they're frantically undressing each other, Zeynep stops, worried that she won't be good enough for him, because she's only slept with Ilyas for the last 30 years. He shrugs, because he's been in the same situation since his wife left, and that reassures her enough to continue. He trails kisses down her body as she gasps in delight, finally having found her happiness in the arms of the most unlikely man possible. The goat, upset at being left outside, barges at the door, but it remains closed all night. Zeynep takes a shower, finally having figured out how to properly move the bucket, while Joseph stands in the kitchen, making breakfast. The pair of them sit at the table, ready to enjoy a beautiful morning together. They don't reckon, though, with the arrival of Fia, who walks by at that very moment, screaming at seeing her mother half with a stranger. She shouts at her mother in German, but Zeynep assures her that Joseph isn't a stranger. Fia grabs her mother's hand, looking for the wedding ring, and is shocked to see it's not there. She asks for a moment alone, clearly upset at the scene she's walked in on and not understanding anything that's going on between her parents. Zeynep agrees, with an apologetic smile to Joseph. Outside in the garden, Fia and Zeynep finally have a much-needed conversation. Fia is upset that everything's changing. Her father has a girlfriend. Her mother has left for this strange new life, and she doesn't know how to deal with it. Zeynep simply asks her daughter to look at her, really look at her, and see how happy she is, with this man, in this place. Fia's anger evaporates as her mother hugs her tightly and the distance between them finally closes. Begrudgingly admitting that Zeynep deserves to be happy too, Fia takes the bicycle down to the harbor to access the internet, leaving Zeynep alone with Joseph again. They have a brief conversation, uncertain about what the future holds for them, and Joseph offers to go and stay at his uncle's place for a few weeks while Fia is visiting. Zeynep doesn't know what will come of the pair of them, but Joseph reassures her by kissing her lightly on the head before heading off to work. Meanwhile, down in the harbor, Fia berates her father over the phone about his new girlfriend and informs him how happy Zeynep is with Joseph, then spies Conrad over the way, who waves to her in greeting. A few days later, Fia and Zeynep are lying in bed together when Fia sits up, complaining about love. Her mother asks her if she's speaking from experience, and she hesitantly reveals that she's in love with someone at university, a girl named Louisa. Zeynep simply laughs, happy that her daughter feels like she can tell her, causing Fia to hit her playfully. The moment is interrupted by shouts from outside, where Joseph is sitting by the tent with his uncle. Ilyas has arrived with Zeynep's father, having heard about Joseph from Fia, and grabs him by the collar, threatening him for stealing his wife. Joseph bites back that no happy wife can be stolen, prompting Drazen to appear and taunt Joseph for not realizing the same thing about his ex. He punches his brother in response, forgetting about Ilyas entirely. Then Conrad shows up, accusing Joseph of blocking the sale of the house. They get into a tussle, rolling on the floor and fighting, while Joseph lets slip that Conrad tried to seduce Zeynep as well. Hearing this, Ilyas jumps on Conrad, punching him, while Drazen gets revenge on Joseph. All four of them are comically fighting and rolling in the dust when the women leave the house and stare in utter confusion at the scene unfolding before them. Joseph's uncle addresses Zeynep's father in Turkish, saying he worked in Turkey for many years and that he once knew Zeynep's mother. Her father takes this as an attack and starts strangling him before he explains they were only small children at the time. Conrad pulls himself out of the fight and greets Fia, trying to look cool, but Zeynep proudly informs him her daughter's gay. Everyone looks up at this, Ilya's trying to understand the situation, and her grandfather cheerily adding that he's seen lesbians on the television. Conrad is shocked, and Ilya's rounds on him for eyeing up his daughter, pulling him back into the fray. Fia accuses her mother upon hearing Ilya's shout, asking what happened between her and Conrad and mimicking barfing. Zeynep rolls her eyes at Fia's dramatics and sharply whistles to bring all the unruly men to a standstill. She addresses them all at once, letting them know she didn't invite them, and that they all need to calm down. They'll have a nice meal together and then all of them have to leave. She tells Ilyas they'll talk afterwards, and then takes Fia down to the town to buy ingredients for the meal. They get into Joseph's boat and head off. The men assemble on the shore and watch them sail away, commenting on various things about each other, their relationships, and their connections in a variety of languages. They then disperse to sort themselves out some beers and get things prepared for Zeynep's return. When they get back, the men have set up for dinner. Ilyas is preparing vegetables when Zeynep approaches him, and he shows her that he never took off his ring, not even for a moment. She still hasn't put hers back on though, and she doesn't even know where it is, dashing his hopes that she might still be clinging on to some part of him. Her father comes in and muscles Ilyas out of the way, taking over the chopping and lamenting that he never retired to Turkey with her mother when they had the chance. At dinner, it's surprisingly civil. The men are happily laughing and toasting. Zeynep stands up, pulling out her paper to make the speech she was going to make at her mother's funeral, the woman who brought them all together, but then abandons the paper and decides to speak from her heart instead. She makes a beautiful toast to her mother's life and happiness, and the adventure she left for Zeynep to discover. Fia fetches a radio from inside and plays 99 Luftballons, which gets everyone up and dancing, even the older men. Everyone, that is, except Joseph, who sees Zeynep laughing as she dances with Ilyas and watches on sadly, believing that there's no space in her heart for him anymore. As the group all say their goodbyes and get into their vehicles, Joseph walks off into the night alone. Fia has agreed to get her father to drive her to Italy to see her lover, but she questions Zeynep whether she's doing the right thing, chasing after Louisa. She doesn't even know if the other girl likes her or not. Zeynep encourages her daughter to chase her happiness, now knowing how important it is to be herself. She shares a long look with Ilyas, not needing to speak any words to know that things are over for good between them, before he gets in the van and drives them all away. She returns to the house, sitting alone at the large table and contemplating what she's going to do with her life next. She's come to her conclusion about happiness, as she sees a single red balloon floating in the corner of the house, taking it as a sign. She runs down the path after Joseph, balloon in hand, desperately trying to catch up to him before he notices her chasing him and is forced to stop and turn around. He sees her with the red balloon in hand and knows it means she's chosen him. She's chosen the life she wants for herself. He closes the distance between them, kissing her passionately, a promise for the future that awaits them. The red balloon flies into the sky as Zeynep holds Joseph tightly, soaring over the ocean as the pair kiss by the dawning Croatian sunrise.